Picture this. The year is 1815. The drawing rooms of London are filled with candlelight, silk, and secrets. Everyone knows the rule. A sensible marriage is the only path to safety, and Lady Charlotte Fairchild, spirited and intelligent, is ready to follow it. Her hand is promised to the charming, if predictable, Lord Edmund Pembroke. It is a perfect match, securing her future. But what if the most sensible path is the most heartbreaking? What if the only man who has ever truly seen her is Adrian Blackthorne, the Duke of Ashworth, a man known across the country for his cold heart and impenetrable pride? You are about to witness an emotional slow burn where years of forbidden love are poured onto paper, into unsent letters never meant to be read. What happens when a woman trapped by duty stumbles upon the shocking truth that the Duke's coldness was not disdain, but a desperate, self-sacrificing devotion? Settle in, grab a cup of tea, and prepare to be swept away. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single devastating detail of Charlotte and Adrian's journey. Part 1. The Silent Duke. The announcement had been sealed with a handshake and a sigh of relief from Lady Charlotte Fairchild's mother, but to Charlotte it felt more like a heavy gold shackle closing around her wrist. The setting was a dizzyingly bright morning in late spring, sunlight pooling on the polished mahogany of the Fairchild drawing room as Lord Edmund Pembroke, her officially recognized suitor, raised her hand to his lips. He was precisely what society required: handsome, well-mannered, and the heir to a comfortable, unencumbered estate. He was also utterly predictable, and his ambitious charm left a strange, hollow echo in Charlotte's chest. "My dearest Charlotte," Edmund murmured, his gaze sweeping the room to ensure her mother witnessed his affection. "To have your hand is the pinnacle of my good fortune." Charlotte offered a practiced, dutiful smile. "I am happy to secure my family's future, Edmund." It was the truth, delivered without the passion that should accompany such a life-altering vow. Her father, a man more comfortable among his books than his ledgers, had left the family coffers in a state of fragile dignity. A match with Pembroke was necessary. It was sensible. It was a secure harbor after a long, worrying voyage, and duty demanded she accept the security it offered. The engagement itself was the only thing people spoke of for a week. A stream of congratulations flowed into the Fairchild townhouse, most of them praising Charlotte's practicality. She had married well, they whispered, securing an admirable position and a safe income. It was everything a young lady should aspire to. Yet a dark, silent figure stood always at the periphery of her world, observing, never participating in the easy social dance. That figure was Adrian Blackthorne, the Duke of Ashworth. Adrian was not merely wealthy, he was antiquity personified, a cold granite monument of a man possessed of a towering estate and a name that commanded instant, fearful respect. He was also the subject of relentless, delicious gossip. "The Duke is utterly frigid, my dear," Mrs. Thornton, the era's most prolific gossipy hostess, had confided to Charlotte's mother during one tedious call. "No heart in his chest, only ice in a ledger. He watches her, though, doesn't he? Like a great handsome owl. I dare say he wishes he had her dowry, even if he doesn't want the girl." The rumor mill spinning perpetually in the drawing rooms of Mayfair painted Adrian Blackthorne as a creature of coldness and pride, a man scarred by his father's cruelty, which he now inflicted on the world by denying them any sign of human warmth. He was in his early 30s, devastatingly handsome in a way that intimidated rather than invited, and completely, utterly silent. He never courted, never flirted, and rarely spoke more than a clipped, necessary phrase. Charlotte, too, believed the whispers. How could she not? She had known the Duke for years, crossing paths in ballrooms and on country visits, and had never once received a look of genuine warmth, let alone a kind word. He was the perfect, brooding embodiment of pride and aristocratic detachment. When he looked at her now, which he did far too often, a quick, burning glance across a crowded room, Charlotte interpreted it as a sign of his disapproval of her sensible, if unromantic, match. Perhaps he found Pembroke beneath the Blackthorne standard. Adrian, in truth, suffered an exquisitely painful torment. He had loved Lady Charlotte Fairchild for years, a love that had grown from silent admiration to a deep, agonizing devotion that had become, as he thought, the marrow of his bones. He knew her mind, her spirit, the quiet compassion she hid beneath her dutiful exterior, and he wanted nothing more than to claim her. But Adrian was bound by his own crippling flaw, his belief that love was weakness. The cruelty he had endured from his late father was rooted in the emotional demands and subsequent failures of passion, and Adrian had vowed never to open himself to such vulnerability. His goal was now twisted by this conviction. He must protect Charlotte from the supposed burden of marrying a man like him, a man who might lose control, a man prone to a blackthorn darkness. The only way to protect her was to wear his mask of coldness and push her towards the safety of a man like Pembroke, even at the cost of his own happiness. The only place Adrian permitted his true self to exist was in the dead of night, hunched over his massive mahogany desk in the suffocating silence of his study. His valet, a quiet, long-suffering man who understood the torment beneath his master's cold exterior, watched in pained silence from a distance, bringing him fresh ink and paper without question. Adrian wrote. He wrote furiously, a desperate, passionate stream of consciousness that poured out the torrent of emotion he refused to speak. June 14th. The announcement is made. She is lost to me. Good. It is for the best. Pembroke will give her stability. He will not inflict the blackthorn curse upon her bright spirit. June 16th. I saw her today, laughing. Her laugh is a chord of music I shall never hear played for me alone. I believe the silence will kill me. No, I will not speak. To speak is to fail her. The most recent, written mere hours after he had witnessed her receiving the congratulatory handshake from Edmund, was a jagged testament to his despair, sealed and tucked away into a volume of neglected Greek poetry, a place he was certain no one would ever look. Charlotte, do you think me a stone? You must. The world thinks me one. I have built this wall of ice not to keep the world out, but to keep myself from ruining you. I am a darkness that must not touch your light. When you walk down the aisle, I will be watching from the shadow, and I will know that my silence has succeeded in purchasing your safety. Forgive me for the passion I cannot speak, which is truly the only thing I have to offer. This letter, like all the others, was unsent, never meant to be read. It was a secret love, a desperate act of devotion hidden behind a facade of impenetrable pride. Lady Charlotte, receiving a polite curtsy and a clipped, cool nod from the Duke at a family gathering a few days later, walked away certain of his disapproval. He was the cold, untouchable aristocrat. She was the dutiful daughter about to marry for security. Their paths were parallel, never meant to cross in true feeling. She was trapped between duty and desire, duty to her family and a desire for a passion she hadn't yet named. A passion she was certain a man like the silent Duke could never comprehend. The stage was set. The heroine was engaged to the wrong man. The Duke was suffering an emotional slow burn in the deepest silence, and society had drawn its clear lines of class and expectation. Part 2. The Engagement Ball. The ballroom was a masterpiece of temporary brilliance. Thousands of flickering candles, cascades of white roses, and the dizzying polished glide of the assembled ton celebrating the impending nuptials of Lord Edmund Pembroke and Lady Charlotte Fairchild. The occasion was the official engagement ball, hosted by Pembroke's delighted aunt, and it was meant to be a night of unadulterated triumph for Charlotte's sensible choice. Charlotte, in a gown of pale, shimmering silver that made her dark hair seem even richer, performed her duties with flawless grace. She accepted the compliments, tolerated the simpering congratulations, and endured the proprietary hand Edmund placed at the small of her back as he introduced her to a series of increasingly tedious cousins. She was the perfect fiancée, beautiful, composed, and undeniably securing the Pembroke future. Yet beneath the polished surface, a restlessness stirred, a quiet, unacknowledged yearning for something more vital than polite stability. It was during the second waltz, after a set with Edmund that felt mechanically perfect but utterly soulless, that the music shifted to a slower, more intense melody. Charlotte found herself standing near the edge of the floor, observing the swirling spectacle, when a shadow fell over her. She turned. It was Adrian, the Duke of Ashworth. His presence was like a sudden drop in temperature. He stood taller than any other man in the room, his black coat absorbing the light, his expression guarded, perhaps even stern. He rarely danced, and when he did, it was a necessary formality, never a pleasure. He looked at her with an intensity that seemed to peel away the layers of her society composure. "Lady Charlotte," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that cut through the orchestral swell. It was one of the longest sentences she had ever heard him utter. "Your Grace," she replied, her heart giving an unexpected nervous thump. Without another word, he held out his gloved hand. It was not a request, it was a silent command. Charlotte hesitated for only a second. To refuse the Duke of Ashworth was unthinkable. To accept felt like walking into a storm cloud. She placed her hand in his. As they moved onto the floor, the contrast between this dance and her previous one was stark. Edmund had guided her with a practiced, light ease. Adrian held her with a fierce, almost possessive strength, his hand warm against the silk of her back, his steps precise and powerful. There was no easy conversation, no practiced compliment. There was only the unspoken connection that simmered between them, sudden and undeniable. His eyes, the color of dark, polished jade, met hers. For the first time, she saw past the cold pride she always attributed to him and glimpsed something raw and turbulent underneath, a desperate kind of anguish. He didn't smile, didn't flatter, but the way he looked at her told a story his silence always hid. It was a look of deep, profound longing, a gaze that seemed to say, "You are mine, and I have just given you away." The dance became an island in the crowded room, a moment of startling, concentrated feeling. "You appear content, Lady Charlotte," Adrian finally said, his voice flat, but the tightness around his jaw betrayed him. "I am performing my duty, Your Grace," she returned, the words coming out sharper than intended. "As is required." His eyes narrowed slightly, a fleeting spark of respect, or perhaps pain, flashed in their depths. "Duty is a cold master, but a safe one, I grant you." And then, as suddenly as it began, the waltz ended. He bowed stiffly, released her hand, and retreated into the deepest shadow of the archway, his dark figure blending into the architecture. Charlotte was left standing alone, breathless, her fingers tingling, the reality of her engagement suddenly feeling like a crushing weight against the memory of his powerful, silent embrace. The brief but intense dance did not escape the notice of the assembled company. The whispers had already begun earlier in the evening, noting the Duke's constant, moody presence. Now they swelled, growing in volume and spite. "Did you see?" Mrs. Thornton hissed to her companion, fanning herself furiously. "The Duke watches her too closely. Absolutely indecent. He looks at her as if he regrets his own cold nature. Perhaps he believes she should have been a duchess, not a mere Lady Pembroke." "Nonsense," replied the companion. "He is simply assessing the man she chose. The Duke finds Edmund frivolous, I'm certain. He would never want Charlotte. Everyone knows Adrian Blackthorne has no heart." The gossip was relentless, flying from corner to corner. The Duke was envious. The Duke was obsessed. The Duke was simply rude for not congratulating the couple properly. It confirmed everything Charlotte had told herself. He was a creature of pride and emotional distance. She tried to tell herself the intensity of the dance was merely his aggressive style of movement, nothing more. Later that night, the Blackthorne mansion was utterly silent, save for the scratch of a pen. The Duke was back in his study, the memory of Charlotte's soft hand in his still burning through his glove. He had seen the spirit beneath her composure, the glimmer of yearning in her eyes, and the sight had been agony. He knew the safe path he had forced her toward would never satisfy her. He had to be her safety, even if it meant being her tormentor. He took up his quill, writing with a furious, reckless hand, addressing the words to the air, to the void, to the woman he could never allow himself to claim. "You moved in my arms tonight as if you belonged there. I could feel the tremble in your spine when my hand touched you. Foolish hope, Adrian. You are not meant for her warmth. You are the shadow that protects her from the sun, but you cannot bask in it. I see your face when you talk to Pembroke. You are polite, you are kind, you are dutiful. But you do not love him. You will never know the truth, that I would burn the world down to give you happiness, and yet I stand aside. I stand aside because I fear what I might become if I allowed myself the joy of you." He sanded the paper, folded it with surgical precision, and tucked it into the one volume of poetry he knew Charlotte admired and had once briefly held in his library. A volume now long forgotten and kept solely for this desperate purpose. His quill paused before he wrote his final despairing words for the night, the raw core of his secret love and unbearable pain. "You will never know you are the marrow of my bones." The silence of his study swallowed the words. The Duke extinguished the lamp, leaving the chamber to the darkness that matched the state of his heart. His flaw, his refusal to speak his truth, his belief that love is weakness, had cemented Charlotte's fate and his own. Part 3. Letters in the Moonlight. The week following the engagement ball dragged Charlotte into a whirlwind of bridal fittings, tedious visits to the jewelers, and endless planning meetings with her pragmatic mother. The wedding date, now only a fortnight away, loomed over her like a heavy, gilded cloud. Every fitting of silk and lace felt less like dressing for a celebration and more like preparation for a magnificent lifelong imprisonment. The unsettling memory of the waltz with Adrian Blackthorne stubbornly refused to fade. It was a dissonant chord in the otherwise harmonious arrangement of her engagement. She often found herself replaying the feel of his powerful hand, the dark intensity of his gaze, and his clipped, challenging words. Duty is a cold master. He had been rude, perhaps, but undeniably truthful. She felt profoundly cold. Seeking refuge from the domestic pressure, Charlotte retreated one drizzly afternoon to the quiet isolation of the vast Blackthorne library. Adrian, due to his position as a distant cousin by marriage to her mother's family, often permitted her quiet access to his extensive collection of ancient texts and forgotten poetry, a kindness he had never extended to anyone else. The room was shadowed and cool, smelling of aged paper and leather. She selected a rare volume of Greek poetry, one Adrian had once briefly shown her, mentioning its unique binding. It was tucked away on a shelf that was seldom disturbed. As she pulled the heavy book free, a loose, folded sheet of parchment, slightly browned at the edges, slipped from the pages and fluttered to the mahogany floor. Charlotte stooped to retrieve it. It was addressed to no one, sealed with no wax, and the familiar, strong, angular hand, Adrian's own, was instantly recognizable. Curiosity, sharp and irresistible, sliced through her usual decorum. She unfolded the page, intending only to check if it was a forgotten bill or note, but the first sentence arrested her. "I am a darkness that must not touch your light." Her hands began to tremble. This was not a bill. It was a secret, hidden testament. She sank onto a nearby leather Chesterfield, the silence of the massive library amplifying the frantic beating of her own heart. She started reading, not stopping, moving from the first letter to a second, which was tucked inside the back cover, and then a third, wedged deep between the dedication page and the spine. She had stumbled on Adrian's secret cache of unsent letters. She read of his love, his despair, and his agonizing silence. The words were a torrent of raw, unrestrained emotion, the complete antithesis of the cold, withdrawn Duke the world knew. "To watch you smile at Pembroke is a torment I have chosen for myself. You deserve happiness, and I, Charlotte, am unworthy of providing it. I have loved you since the spring we walked by the river. That love is a brand on my soul, and I have hidden it beneath this cloak of pride for your sake. If I spoke it, I would claim you, and I would risk destroying you with the tempest I carry inside me. I am stone to the world, but to you I am only fire. I write these words because they are the only way my heart can speak without betraying the safety I wish you to have. Do you truly think me so cold? Do you believe the rumors? I pray you do. Believe them until the grave for your own good. I would rather be thought a monster than drag you into my storm." And finally, she found the note from the night of the ball, still faintly smelling of his masculine cologne and the bitter iron of ink. "You will never know you are the marrow of my bones." The shock was a physical blow. The proud, silent Duke, the man she had believed to be utterly devoid of warmth and emotion, the man the gossips had labeled as having no heart, had been consumed by a secret, enduring, and agonizing devotion. Adrian's coldness was love, hidden all along. It was not disdain that kept him silent. It was a desperate, self-sacrificing belief that his own nature, scarred by his father's cruelty, was too dangerous for her radiant spirit. His refusal to speak was his ultimate act of protection. As the moonlight began to stream through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, Charlotte sat amidst the scattered evidence of his hidden passion, reeling. The world she had understood minutes ago had fractured. Her conflict, her yearning heart versus the path chosen for her, had just been given a name, a shape, and impossible complication. Her fiancé, Lord Edmund Pembroke, had offered her security and a polished but ultimately shallow affection. Adrian Blackthorne, the Duke of Ashworth, had offered her silence, wrapped in a secret fierce love that demanded a sacrifice of his very soul. Charlotte gathered the letters, her fingers tracing the words written in his unmistakable hand. She had to leave the library before she was discovered, but she could no longer simply walk down the aisle and accept her fate. The knowledge of Adrian's torment and the depth of his unspoken feeling had irrevocably changed everything. Part 4. The Confrontation. The sheer weight of the truth, the Duke's deep hidden love, made the Fairchild townhouse feel suffocating. Charlotte could barely tolerate the cheerful platitudes of her mother or the bland, predictable affection of Lord Edmund Pembroke. She held Adrian's unsent letters, now crumpled slightly from her agitated handling, hidden in the bodice of her day dress, feeling their heat like a dangerous secret. She knew she could not move forward with her life, not one step further toward the altar, without confronting the author of those devastating words. The following evening, under the thin guise of retrieving a book he had lent her, Charlotte took a carriage to Ashworth Manor. The house was enormous, forbidding, and quiet. She instructed the footman to announce her, but when he hesitated, she brushed past, heading straight for the rear of the house, toward the secluded, overgrown knot of gardens Adrian rarely permitted anyone to enter. She found him there, just as dusk was deepening. He was standing alone by a shattered marble fountain, looking utterly remote, his profile sharp against the fading light. "Your Grace," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to steady it. Adrian spun around, his expression instantly transforming from remote brooding to stunned, cold alarm. He had never expected her to seek him out, especially not here, in his private sanctuary. "Lady Charlotte," he managed, his voice stiff, "you are here unchaperoned. This is improper. You should not be here." His immediate retreat into propriety and cold dismissal infuriated her, fueling the courage she desperately needed. She marched toward him, pulling the crumpled sheaf of letters from her bodice and holding them out, a damning accusation. "Don't tell me what is proper, Adrian," she demanded, using his first name for the first time, the intimacy shocking both of them. "Tell me what this is." Adrian's face went utterly white. His mask of pride shattered, revealing the raw despair beneath. He stared at the pages, his breath catching painfully in his chest, knowing instantly what they were. His deepest, most private agony was exposed. "You read them," he stated, the words scraped raw. "They were never meant for your eyes." "They were meant for no one, weren't they?" Charlotte's voice cracked with a mixture of pain and anger. "And all this time, all the years of your coldness, your silence, your arrogance, it was all a lie. You allowed me to believe you were a monster when you were suffering this?" She gestured with the letters. "Why, Adrian? Why condemn yourself and me to this torment?" Adrian did not look at her. He stared at the cracked marble. His flaw, his deep-seated belief that love meant weakness and risk, forced him to cling to his chosen narrative of unworthiness. "Because it is the truth, Charlotte," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper, thick with torment. "I am not fit for you. My father taught me what love does to a man. It makes him cruel. It makes him vulnerable. I have Blackthorn blood. I have a darkness in me that would eventually turn on your light. I will not subject you to that." He finally met her eyes, and the sheer despair in his gaze was a profound revelation. "I chose silence to keep you safe. I chose Pembroke for you because he is safe. He is a good man. He will provide the stability and quiet happiness you deserve. I could only offer you a storm." "And you decided for me?" she challenged, tears stinging her eyes. "You decided that a safe life without feeling is preferable to a passionate life with risk? I am not a fragile creature, Adrian. I am strong enough to choose my own storm." She took a step closer, the gap between them shrinking until she could feel the heat radiating off his body. His control was visibly fraying. "When you wrote that I was the marrow of your bones, was that a lie?" she pressed. The question broke him. He reached out not to touch her, but to brace himself on the fountain. "No," he confessed, his voice ragged. "It is the only truth I possess. I love you, Charlotte. I have always loved you, and I hate myself for not being a man who could simply claim you." He turned his back to her, trying to regain the iron control that was his lifelong defense. "Now you know. Leave. Go back to your duty. Forget these letters. Marry Pembroke and be safe." Charlotte moved swiftly, driven by an impulse more powerful than any propriety. She reached out and placed her palm flat against the expanse of his back, a silent challenge to his self-imposed coldness. Adrian tensed, his shoulders rigid. Then, with a low, desperate sound, he swung back around, grabbing her by the arms. The proximity, the shared passion of the confrontation, the years of suppressed emotion became a volatile force. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and the air between them thickened, electrified. He moved, his body leaning into hers, and their lips were only inches apart, nearly a kiss, a raw, burning prelude to the passion he had always denied himself. But the moment he felt the softness of her breath on his skin, his fear, his duty to protect her from himself, slammed back into place. He abruptly released her, his hands dropping as if scorched. "Go," he commanded, his voice trembling with effort, "before I ruin both of us." Stunned by the abrupt retraction and terrified by the raw depth of the feeling that had nearly consumed them both, Charlotte stood frozen for a moment. Her heart was pounding, her mind reeling from the devastating admission and the near-fatal surrender. He had admitted his love, but his pride and his fear of his own darkness were still more powerful than his desire. Her duty, her family's financial stability, the safety of the path she had already chosen, yelled at her. She snatched up the letters, now worthless as evidence but priceless as truth, and turned to flee, not back toward the manor, but blindly into the growing shadows of the garden. She fled, torn by duty. The truth had been spoken, but the path forward was more complicated and agonizing than ever. The Duke was a man of love, not ice, but he was still refusing to fight for her. Part 5. The eve of the wedding. The night before the wedding was meant to be one of quiet anticipation, filled with final preparations and peaceful sleep. For Lady Charlotte Fairchild, it was a crucible of profound misery. The house hummed with the quiet excitement of the staff, but in her elegantly appointed chamber, a devastating storm raged. She stood by the window, peering out into the darkening city. The rain had begun an hour earlier, a cold, relentless downpour, mirroring the chaos in her heart. The delicate lace veil and the pristine white satin gown, laid out in solemn splendor by her maid, seemed less like symbols of joy and more like the uniform for her inevitable, loveless future. Her realization was stark and inescapable. Life with Edmund is safety, but no passion. Since her flight from the Duke's garden, the truth of his letters had become a burning, undeniable conviction. She knew now that the quiet, secure life she was about to embrace with Lord Edmund Pembroke would be one of polite smiles and empty affection. Edmund was kind, ambitious, and utterly unsuitable for a heart that now knew the fierce, deep resonance of Adrian's hidden love. She had chosen duty, and it tasted like ash. She ran a hand over the cool silk of the wedding dress. Safety, her mother had pressed. Security. But what value was security when every breath felt like a betrayal of her own soul? The image of Adrian's tormented face, his desperate confession of love, and the terrifying, passionate moment they had nearly shared in the gardens played over and over in her mind. Meanwhile, miles away in the vast, echoing silence of Ashworth Manor, Adrian was making his own terrible preparations. He could not bear it. The thought of witnessing Charlotte, his marrow of bones, standing beside another man, exchanging vows he had written for her in his soul, was an impossible agony. He had done his duty. He had ensured her safety, maintaining his silence to the bitter end. His last act of devotion would be his removal. He sat by his desk, finishing a final clipped note to his solicitor regarding the handling of his estates, a cold, concise document that betrayed nothing of his emotional state. His faithful valet, who watched his master with silent, not suffering devotion, brought him a final glass of brandy. "Will you be gone long, your grace?" the valet ventured, his voice low with concern. Adrian looked up, his face gaunt. "Until the world forgets me, perhaps. Until the pain is only a scar, not a gaping wound. I am unable to watch, Peters. The ship sails at dawn." He had arranged passage on a vessel bound for the continent, seeking the kind of harsh, impersonal distance that might numb the relentless ache in his chest. His love had demanded his sacrifice, and his pride demanded he execute it with stoic finality. He had chosen the path of the lonely exile. As Adrian dressed in heavy, dark travel clothes, the escalating storm outside seemed to enter the room. The wind howled against the window panes, and thunder rattled the expensive crystal on the mantelpiece. The storm outside mirrors the storm in Charlotte's heart. Charlotte, still restless, finally moved away from her window. She picked up a small, elegant box containing the family sapphires she was to wear tomorrow. She looked at the jewels, cold, glittering, and beautiful, and saw her life. Glittering, beautiful, and utterly cold. Suddenly, with a surge of terrifying clarity, she saw her future. Years of polite conversation, the absence of passion, the endless, grinding weight of duty fulfilled at the expense of a life truly lived. She remembered Adrian's eyes, full of desperate love. She remembered her own desire for more than mere survival. She couldn't do it. She wouldn't do it. The memory of the letters, his truth, had armed her. Snatching up a cloak, pulling the hood low over her hair, Charlotte made a decision as sharp and sudden as a bolt of lightning. She grabbed a small satchel, shoving the crumpled letters inside. She had to find him. She had to break his silence. And finally, she had to break free of her own duty. She crept down the servants' stairs, the back door groaning softly as she slipped out into the furious night. The rain instantly soaked her cloak, but she barely noticed. She called for the first available hackney carriage, giving the driver the only destination that mattered, Ashworth Manor. Adrian, cloak drawn tight, was descending the grand staircase of his manor, his valise in hand, ready to begin his desolate journey. The clock in the hall was striking midnight. Part 6. The Interrupted Wedding. The wedding morning dawned, not with cheerful sunshine, but with the aftermath of the night's relentless downpour. The air was damp and heavy, matching the atmosphere inside the grand, stone-cold church. Lady Charlotte Fairchild, dressed in the stiff, beautiful armor of her wedding gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Every step was a step toward what she knew would be a mistake. She saw her mother's triumphant, practical smile and the composed, expectant face of Lord Edmund Pembroke waiting for her at the altar. Edmund was handsome, polished, and unaware of the emotional detonation currently occurring inside his bride. The chapel was packed. The entire season's society was present, all eager witnesses to the perfect, sensible match. But among the sea of faces, one was conspicuously missing. The Duke of Ashworth. He was gone, already aboard his vessel, sailing away to a self-imposed exile, believing his silence had secured her happiness. Charlotte reached the altar. The bishop began the ancient, solemn ceremony, his voice booming with authority. Charlotte gripped the bouquet of white roses so tightly her knuckles were white, her mind screaming against the words being spoken. I will not do this. I cannot choose safety over my soul. The bishop arrived at the pivotal question, the one that required the definitive, life-altering response. Charlotte Mary Fairchild, wilt thou have this man to thy wedded husband, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy state of matrimony? Wilt thou love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and in health, and, forsaking all others, keep thee only unto him, so long as ye both shall live? A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the church. Every eye was on the bride. Charlotte looked at Edmund, whose smile wavered slightly, then at her mother, whose eyes flashed a silent, terrified warning. She looked at the polished marble floor, the cold stained glass windows, and saw only the image of Adrian's tormented face in the moonlit garden, his words echoing louder than the bishop's. You are the marrow of my bones. She took a breath that was more a gasp than air. I cannot say I do. The two syllables were barely audible, a fragile whisper that nonetheless struck the assembly with the force of a cannonball. A collective stunned sound rose from the crowd, a rush of horrified gasps. Edmund's polished composure dissolved into shocked anger. Charlotte's mother let out a small, strangled cry. The bishop, utterly flustered, tried to recover the situation. Lady Charlotte, I believe you misspoke. But Charlotte was already moving. This was not a moment of hesitation. It was a desperate, final break for freedom. Ignoring the shouts and the rising panic in the pews, she gathered the trailing satin of her gown and turned her back on the altar. She fled the chapel, running down the long aisle alone, the rustle of her dress and the ringing silence of the crowd the only sounds accompanying her escape. She burst through the heavy oak doors and into the unforgiving, damp morning air. The stone steps of the church were wet and slick. She paused, frantic, looking wildly down the cobbled street. Where was she going? She was an hour too late. Adrian was already gone, sailing away. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, she saw him. Parked near the edge of the churchyard, slightly obscured by the remaining mist and the dripping trees, was a dark, simple carriage. Standing beside it, looking like a silhouette carved from granite, was Adrian Blackthorne. He hadn't left. He had driven only a short distance from Ashworth, drawn by some invisible, agonizing thread, unable to completely sever the connection. He had been standing there for an hour, watching the church doors, prepared to endure the sight of her departure as Pembroke's wife, before turning his carriage toward the docks and a life of desolate solitude. He was in his traveling clothes, his hair damp from the spray, and he looked utterly defeated. Their eyes met across the damp stone. Adrian's expression was a mix of confusion, disbelief, and a profound, aching hope he hadn't known he still possessed. Charlotte hiked her wedding dress up, heedless of the mud and the ruin of the lace, and ran down the steps toward him. "Adrian," she cried, her voice tearing. "I read them, I know. You chose the wrong path. Your silence was a lie." He didn't speak. He simply stood rigid, watching the beautiful, ruined bride running toward him, her sacrifice thrown aside. She reached him, breathless, and stopped inches away. "I chose you," she declared, her chest heaving. "I choose your storm over their safety." Adrian's resolve, his lifetime of self-imposed control and fear, finally spectacularly crumbled. Seeing her, free but terrified, standing before him, demanding his truth, he could not maintain the lie 1 second longer. The goal to protect Charlotte had to yield to the deeper, more profound need to possess and cherish her. With a choked, desperate sound that was half pain, half relief, Adrian dropped his valise and pulled her to him, his arms closing around her with a fierce, possessive strength. The cloak, the wedding dress, the rain, none of it mattered. Their first kiss was not polite or tentative or dutiful. It was the unleashed passion of years of denial, a desperate, raw connection that cemented their souls together. It was a kiss born of truth, a vow exchanged in the middle of the storm, with the indignant gasps of the abandoned wedding party still echoing from the chapel doors. Epilogue: Vows born of truth. A week later, the scandal had reached its peak and begun its predictable, slow descent into history. Lord Edmund Pembroke had departed for the continent, citing a sudden, urgent business venture. Lady Charlotte's mother was in shock, but ultimately, the shame of an interrupted wedding was less than the security of an actual duchess. Adrian, who had never cared for social opinion, claimed his bride. Their marriage was quiet, performed in the small private chapel at Ashworth Manor with only the essential witnesses, Charlotte's father, who offered a tearful, understanding embrace, and Adrian's long-suffering valet, who permitted himself a rare, small smile. There were no elaborate silks or grand processions, only the two of them, standing together, their hands clasped tightly. Adrian, his voice now steady and clear, no longer trapped by his fear, spoke his vows without reservation. "I promise you no mere safety, Charlotte, but every storm and every calm, bound by a love that is fierce and enduring. I promise to always speak my truth to you, and to never again mistake pride for protection." Charlotte smiled, her eyes shining with the spirit he loved. "And I promise to embrace the passion you offer, Adrian, to stand with you in the storm, knowing that your love is the only true home I require." Their marriage was one born of truth, not silence. Duke, who had loved her in silence, finally found his voice, and in doing so found his happiness. What a storm! What an escape! And what a kiss! Thank you so much for reading to every agonizing, slow burn moment of their story. We hope you were swept away by their journey from duty to desire. If you loved Charlotte and Adrian's passionate defiance, and you were rooting for the Duke to finally speak his mind, please like this video to show your love for this couple. Subscribe for more compelling historical romances and tales of forbidden love. Comment below. What was your favorite line from Adrian's secret letters? We'd love to hear which moment of his devotion you found most powerful. Until the next tale of longing and duty. Farewell.